Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Franchise Spotlight. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Octopussy, which came out in 1983, once again directed by John Glenn. And let's get rolling. So as every James Bond movie before this does have sort of a cold open, if you will, where James Bond is on a mission, whether he is getting intel or it's finishing up a previous mission before it gets into the actual movie. James Bond climbs into the stall, and then the horse, because they were at a horse track, it lifts up and a plane comes out. And he just starts flying away, and then they end up shooting a missile at him, and whenever I talk about James Bond being cool or suave or, just being like a total badass, this is just a prime example of James Bond having everything under control, because he ends up flying a plane through a hangar away from the missile, and the missile ends up blowing up a plane in there, which ends up blowing up the whole hangar that they're in. So in this movie, we do see James Bond once again traveling the world. This time he ends up in India. He ends up coming across a woman named Octopussy, which the movie is named after. I believe her dad or her uncle or someone above her had connections to James Bond, and that's how they kind of know each other in this movie. Because usually it's unexplained of how the villain knows who James Bond is, just because they're in the villain underworld and they know who James Bond is. But in this movie, they actually explain how the female lead of Octopussy knows who James Bond is. It's because they were connected somehow, some way. So I did like how they kind of explained that, because if you look back on any other movie, it's like, oh, I know who James Bond is. He's a secret agent with a license to kill, and this is all he does. So essentially this movie is about James Bond, who finds out that a previous 00 agent had died, and he ends up picking up the trail that he had previously left cold because he died, or got murdered rather. Eventually James Bond finds out that the Soviets are involved, and they have this plan to blow up a US Air Force base with a nuke hidden in a circus. There is a really cool evil henchman in this. He has a saw, he's missing his arm, and he has an attachment on it with a saw blade at the end, and he uses it like a yo-yo. And I, for some reason, thought that was a really cool but very non-practical way to kill people, because the only way he can really kill people is if he's above them and he can drop his arm saw like a yo-yo and kill anyone below him, like he tries to do with James Bond. But for some reason, I thought that was just really cool but also really goofy at the same time, clearly trying to capitalize on the popularity of Jaws with his metal teeth, or Oddjob with his hat that he could just throw and it's a saw and cuts pretty much anything. So you can clearly see that they're trying to get back into the cool henchman phase, but honestly for me it didn't work in that aspect. I just thought that was a very cool character aspect that they wanted to bring into the movie. Also, the villain with the Yoyo Hand, he's credited in the movie as Thug with Yo-Yo. So it's very interesting that he doesn't have a name, that he's just the thug with a yo-yo, because ultimately that's what it is, it's a yo-yo hand saw. Something else that this movie did that I actually really liked was Octopussy had her own militia of women, which I thought was fascinating, because I don't believe a James Bond movie had done this before, where they had a female militia really play a key role in helping James Bond out. However, they were wearing very, very skimpy outfits for no reason, which I didn't really understand or why they wanted to do that. But the idea of a female militia helping James Bond out, I thought that was a very fascinating aspect that they brought into this, and I hope that it's something that continues in future movies, but ultimately we'll have to wait and see. And I feel really bad for this because I can't remember the character's name, but my favorite character in this movie, aside from James Bond, is the taxi driver or the cab driver in the middle of the movie whenever James Bond is on the run in India. I can't remember the character's name and I can't find it, but he had some of the best one-liners in the whole franchise that I've seen so far. It's just a whole goofy sequence. Because James Bond, one line I do remember is James Bond tells him to step on it, and meaning like, hey, let's get going because we're being chased. He steps on the gas, and the car lifts like this and drives on its back wheels, speeding up, because that's how physics work.
BJ, we have company. No problem, this is a company car.
Also, a lot of people like to compare these two franchises, and by a lot of people, I'm making that up because I don't know anyone who does, so I'm just doing it for the sake of this. Mission Impossible Rogue Nation was famously known for Tom Cruise hanging out the side of the C-130 while it was in flight. I must say, that does not have anything on James Bond doing the exact same thing 30, 40 years earlier, because Roger Moore and his old ass hanging onto an airplane. It's awesome, and it really feels like the stakes are really on the line because he is just hanging onto this airplane while the guy flying it is trying to shake him off, and it just really feels like James Bond is in danger. And I really like whenever protagonists are what feels like real danger, that they might actually not survive the ordeal, because and I've said this before, where I don't really like, you know, happy-go-lucky protagonist story where he just comes in and saves the day. I really like whenever they're put to the test, and during this scene, while yes, I could have figured the outcome that he'd be okay, it really felt like that, you know, his life was in danger, and I really liked that aspect. But of course, like I said, James Bond is fine. He saves the day, as he always does. But that's pretty much going to wrap up my thoughts on 1983's Octopussy. Thanks so much for watching, and goodbye.